Hello, good evening. This is Terry Allen, Radical Progressive. I've kind of figured out what's happening now. I think I see what's going on. Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi, these Democrats and Republicans that are negotiating for the stimulus bill, trying to decide if they should give the unemployed $300 more a week or $600 more a week. Should they give us a stimulus check of $600 a month or maybe $1,200 a month, which is chicken feed. It's not going to help anyone, honestly. So here's the situation. Since COVID started, when it first started, remember what happened to the stock market? It just crashed. It plummeted. And what happened? The Treasury gave the stock market $4 trillion. Why do you think it's still up? Half the country's not even working. 1/3 of all businesses in the United States are going to be permanently closed. So what's going to happen to all these people? Let's frame this, because the government shut down the country, made everybody stay at home, which, it's debatable whether that was the right thing to do or not. But it was done, and people were filing for unemployment, but you cannot live on unemployment. So what started happening was that people stopped paying their rent, because if you don't pay rent, then you can kind of afford food and gasoline for your car and things like that. But what's been happening is that the rent that they're not paying is not just going away. It's multiplying and multiplying, because it's not going away. It's being added to your rental agreement. And there may be penalties and interest as well. So the moratorium may or may not be lifted December 31st. But whenever it gets lifted, you're going to have millions of people that cannot pay their back rent and their back mortgages. So what is going to happen? Because we're not getting the stimulus enough to survive on. People are surviving on the money that they would be paying their rents and their mortgages. And this is could be anywhere from 20 to 30% of Americans. So what's going to happen when the moratorium is lifted is that there's going to be so much rent due that the tenants and people with their mortgages will not be able to pay. They cannot. And so what might happen is they'll try to negotiate a payment plan to pay it back. But here's the problem. There's going to be a lot of foreclosures. And I think I see what's going on now, because the Congress and the Senate are completely out of touch. They do not obviously understand the dynamics of what is going on in this economy, because they are not offering stimulus. And then Nancy Pelosi said, about 2 weeks ago, that we don't need to worry about a stimulus now because we've got a new president that's going to be coming in at the the 20th of January, and everything, and a vaccine is coming out soon, so we don't need to worry now. I don't like the C word. I don't like to use the C word, but I am telling you that there is one human being on this planet that deserves to be called that, and that's Nancy Pelosi. She is the most sickening, out of touch, scummy human being in this country. She is horrible. Horrible, horrible. She needs to be primaried. I know we tried that a couple of times and it just didn't go anywhere, because the media is involved in rigging the election. because the media, like what happened with Bernie Sanders, remember, the media, if they talked about Bernie Sanders, what you got was he's a socialist, his programs are way too expensive, they're never going to work, and it's a form of brainwashing, because people really don't know much about Bernie Sanders. They don't know much about anything. So when you say communist or socialist, there is a image that comes into the mind of most people. And that is that these are horrible people, and oh my God, socialists and communists have killed millions throughout the world, and we don't want that here. So the American people are being manipulated, and they're very easy to manipulate because they are uneducated. I know that there's a lot of educated people, but they're not wise, and they don't understand history because it's not taught correctly. So what's going to happen is that we are going to have millions of people that cannot pay their back rent, and they're not going to get any help from the government, although the government's fault, because the shutdown, mandatory shutdown, it's the government's fault that there's so many unemployed and there's so many businesses that failed, because they didn't do what Europe did. They kept paying the employees their wages so that they could pay their rents, pay their mortgages, and survive until this pandemic was over. But you've got people in the Congress and the Senate that are more worried about the deficit. Now, they're not worried when it comes time to bail out Wall Street, because you've got to keep the Wall Street numbers up, because the super rich, like Jeff Bezos and all of these guys out there, their portfolios, their money is tied up in stock. So if the stock market crashes, their portfolios crash. And we can't have that. We got to maintain the lifestyle of the rich and famous, the billionaire class. Can't allow that, because the billionaire class controls what the government does because of money, because of the corruption. So one hand washes the other. Now, if you look exactly at what's going to happen, is these people that are going to get evicted and foreclosed on have no options, nowhere to go. If they've got relatives they can move in with, some might have, maybe. Those are the fortunate ones. But most of these people are going to end up on the street, because I can tell you that the federal government is not going to do anything to help the poor and the middle class and the unemployed. That's obvious. They're not funding states. They're not helping the states, because all the states are bankrupt. They can't afford the unemployment payments, and the federal government's not going to give them money. And the reason they're not is because this insane economic philosophy of, if you give everything to the rich, a rising tide lifts all boats, or the trickle-down theory. That theory is bullshit. It doesn't work. It never has worked, but it does work for the 1%. It doesn't work for everyone else. But see, that doesn't matter, because the 1% are in control. And so, of course, they're going to push an economic policy that's good for them. And they don't care about everybody else. So what's going to happen is that you're going to have millions of people on the streets. And when that happens, you're going to have a revolution. Finally. It may be armed revolution. We may have sticks and stones to throw. But when you have that many desperate people in the streets, there's going to be looting and burning that you have not seen. And this is not Antifa, and this is not Black Lives Matter. This is desperate American citizens that have their backs up against the wall and they have nowhere to go except to burn it down. Let's burn it down. So that's the situation. And Congress and the Senate obviously do not understand this dynamic. Because if they did, they would be helping the middle class and the poor. But they're not. Now, they just are advocating for a huge military budget. They're gearing up for more war, I can promise you that, with Biden in office and the insane warmongering war criminals that he's putting in his cabinet. You can be guaranteed that we're going to get into a war immediately. We're going to escalate, probably Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria, probably. I talked to somebody a couple of days ago, and they told me, oh, Assad is a monster. And I said, why? They said, because he gassed his own people. I said, but don't you remember about 6 months ago that was debunked? That story was debunked. It was figured out after an investigation that Al-Qaeda actually did the gassing and blamed it on Assad so that the United States would come in and start bombing, which they did with no evidence. And this person didn't know that because the media doesn't talk about it. They are a brainwashing propaganda arm for the government and the 1% and the military-industrial complex. That is what the major media is, and nothing else. They are only interested in profits, and they're interested in pushing a certain agenda which benefits the 1%. And this is CNN, MSNBC, Fox, you name it. Any of the, Disney Channel, Comcast, they're all in it because they're owned by the 1%. So of course they're not going to tell you the truth. The only place you're going to get the truth is from podcasts, YouTube. There's some great shows on YouTube, and I've listed them before. I can list them again if you want. But what's going to happen is that there is going to be an uprising against the Congress and the Senate that you have not seen, because these people in the Senate and the Congress, they're probably 99% of them are millionaires. So they've got their money. They've got their cushion. They don't feel the pain. They don't see the pain because they all hang out in Washington, D.C. They don't have town halls anymore, because if they did, these people would be lynched. And I'd be right there with the rope. I'm telling you. Because I'm about as angry as I've ever been. And if you're not angry too, then you have a problem. Because we are going down a slippery slope into hell. And it looks like there's nobody that's going to give us a handout. There's nobody that's going to help. It's not our fault, remember. None of this is our fault. But it's too bad. Too bad. You're not going to get help for rent. You're not going to get help at all. It's just too bad how it turned out. And you know what's going to happen? The 1% are going to buy up all those properties at 10 cents on the dollar. That's what's going to happen. Just like it did 2009. Remember? So that's the game that's being played, because Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell are owned by the 1%. They will only do what's good for the 1%. And if you listen to Nancy Pelosi and you are able to not throw up, listen to what she says, because she's nuts and she's out of touch. She said that we have a new president now. Well, actually before that she said, well, Trump only wants to have his name on a check, and that ain't going to happen. She is the worst strategist. She is the worst negotiator. But you know why she's the Speaker of the House? Because she's the biggest fundraiser of the Democratic Party. Is that surprising? Shouldn't be. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to have probably blood in the streets. Let's hope that the police and the military won't fire on the population. But you saw what happened with the looting and burning during the Black Lives Matter protests. Police were right in there kicking ass because they don't give a shit. They, like Jimmy Dore says, because he's got relatives who are police, he said a cop is a cop. They have a mental attitude of they like power and they like control and they love carrying guns and I've seen where police are like, I can't wait to kill somebody. I mean, these people are nuts. When I lived in Chicago, there was a bar right down the street from where I worked, and I'd go in there after work, and there'd be a bunch of cops in there. And they would be arguing and fighting, and just like, they were like gangsters. It was a joke. So let's hope that they don't fire on us, but they probably will. I'm ready to be a martyr, because taking out the oligarchy, taking out and giving the country back to the middle class and the working class and the poor, that is the most important thing that we can do. And it's a cause worth dying for. And I'm ready to lay down my life for my American brothers and sisters. Are you? Because something has to be done. And this cannot go on. This cannot go on indefinitely. And we don't have time for another election in 2 years. So, are you ready? Are we ready? Think about it. Because hell is coming. And it's going to be bloody and it's going to be glorious. Because if we can destroy the oligarchy, then we take back our country. And I'm ready to die for that cause. Are you? This is Terry Allen, Radical Progressive. My door's probably going to come crashing in. There's going to be who knows what, high power. Oh my God, he's fomenting insurrection. You goddamn better believe I am, because the Congress and the Senate have lost their moral right to rule, because they're a cabal of war criminals and they're running an empire against our will, the will of the people. We don't want the wars that we're in. We don't want what's happening. But in our name, the 1%, the oligarchy, are running this country, and they're running the world empire, and the world empire is it's the globalists for world control. You're looking at one world currency eventually. You are looking at a situation where if you're like me or Jimmy Dore or some other people, and the government doesn't like what you're saying, what are you going to do if they turn off your ATM card? If they turn off your credit cards? Because we don't do cash anymore, hardly. What are you going to do? Because it's very easy to do. And the government has no qualms about it. If you are standing up, speaking truth to power, you're in danger. Just like I'm in danger. But this is a war worth fighting. Declaration of Independence. If you look at the grievances that we had back then against King George, you will find that it's worse today than it was then. But the problem is, like, everybody's calling for a general strike. A general strike's not going to work. Because those of us that are still working are so desperate to keep our money coming in so we can eat and pay our rent and all the other things, is that it's going to be very difficult for people to go on a general strike. It just is. Now, when those people are laid off and evicted from their homes, then you've got another problem on your hands. That is when you can go beyond the general strike. You can take this country and you can rip it out of the hands of the oligarchy, and you can give it back to the American population. What's going to happen to the oligarchy? Is it going to be a situation like Marie Antoinette in France, a couple hundred years ago, where she so callously said, "Let them eat cake"? Well, the French were a little less civilized than we are, and they went into the palace and they drug these people out in the streets and they chopped their heads off. Now that's a good possibility, because the American population is so angry and so beaten down and have been nearly driven crazy with what's going on, that the 1% may end up dead. I'm not advocating violence. I'm predicting it. Because we're at a crossroads. If we don't take our country back now, we never will. And we're going to be slaves in a digitized, homogenized, sterilized nation, or we do what we're told, or we disappear. What's the difference between the American empire and our government and, say, communist China or Russia or Cuba? Everybody talks about how we're this wonderful democracy and we're so much better than these other countries. Really? Really? What happened to our democracy? We have a hand-picked candidate like Joe Biden, which he will do what the 1% and the Wall Street bankers want, because he's bought and sold and paid for. He's corrupt, very corrupt. So what's going to happen is there's no more democracy. That's it. It's done. Bernie Sanders was marginalized. He was demonized in the media. He would have won. If the media had just been honest and let the chips fall, then Bernie Sanders would have been our president. But no. Now we got Donald Trump. Well, when Donald Trump leaves office and Joe Biden goes in, everybody's going to breathe a sigh of relief. But it's a little premature, because hell is coming. Fire and brimstone from above is coming down. And we are going to take this country back from the oligarchy, or we're going to die trying. And that is the way it is. So this is Terry Allen. I'm a radical progressive, and I consider myself a revolutionary. I want to take this country back so bad. The oligarchy is so evil. It's like satanic. When you've got the oligarchy, which was tied into Jeff Epstein, and the prostitution ring, and the sex trafficking ring, it's all tied into the 1%. Because that's what they do. That's what the British royal family does. That's what they have done for centuries. So, my friends and neighbors, my brothers and sisters, let's think long and hard about what's going to happen. Try to have a good evening. All right, take care.